Chapter 631. She raised her head and looked at him with a pitiful expression. Tang Yu took a deep breath and whispered in her ear, "See if I don't spank your little bitch tonight." "Tang Yu, what about you? You're so fierce." "I'm thinking of changing my mind now." Her voice was like a kitten, and he was so angry that he wanted to eat her up, this little bastard. But no matter how chaotic it was, the wedding still went ahead. 3 people. Lin Jinrong sat next to them and witnessed the wedding. When the bouquet was thrown, Pei Chi did not throw it away. Instead, she squatted down and gave the bouquet to Lin Jinrong. "Don't think that I'll forgive you just like this." He reluctantly accepted it and said arrogantly. Pei Chi smiled with tears in her eyes. "Jinrong, thank you." But in the end, they still missed it. That part of the past could only be regarded as a beautiful memory. "Pei Chi, don't expect me to call you my cousin-in-law. No way." Old Master Lin, who was at the side, was a little disappointed at the outcome. He loved to watch dramas with reversals the most. He glared at Tang Yu fiercely. This kid had been so calm since he was young. Really, there was no suspense at all. However, no one, not even Pei Chi, knew about it. In Tang Yu's calmness, he was a little panicked. He believed that she loved him, but he was more afraid that the pregnant woman would be emotional and forget that she was the mother of Tang Yu's child. It was not until Pei Chi said sorry to Jinrong that he was relieved. Like her, he could only say sorry. Because of love, there was no way to back down. Jinrong's kiss was already the limit of his tolerance. If Chi was pregnant with a daughter, then Jinrong would have kissed 2 important women in his life in one go. After the wedding, Pei Chi and Tang Yu left in a black limousine. The hundreds of Maybachs lined up in a row were eye-opening as they drove all the way to the hotel. Lin Jinrong sat in his wheelchair and kept watching. His gaze was deep. The surroundings were filled with people, especially the old man. Only now did he remember that his little darling had woken up. "You little brat, after sleeping for so long. Only that little lamb can wake you up, right?" Tears streamed down old Master Sheng's face. After a while, he rebuked Lin Jinrong's mother. "And you? It's been so long, and you didn't tell me. You were waiting for this day, weren't you?" Lin Jinrong's mother couldn't express her bitterness. Wasn't this what Jinrong wanted? He had just woken up. Wasn't she relying on him? Lin Jinrong only smiled and looked forward. Suddenly, his gaze froze. This was because he saw Pei Huan in the crowd from afar. She stood at a distance, very different from how he remembered her. Although she was still dressed in pure clothes, she could not hide the haggard look on her face. He remembered her voice. He remembered her saying that Pei Chi was getting married. The voice that woke him up was her. Pei Huan looked at Lin Jinrong with shock and disbelief. More than that, she felt regret. He was actually awake. She thought that he would never wake up in his lifetime. Then, the child that she aborted, the marriage that she lost. Pei Huan's body swayed and she almost couldn't stand. Her lips moved, but in the end, she couldn't say a word. Chapter 632. Pei Huan wanted to escape. She was so ashamed that she had nowhere to stand. Lin Jinrong looked at her quietly. His voice was a little hoarse. "Pei Huan, long time no see." She stood there in a daze, unable to move or say a word. "I heard that the child is gone, right?" Lin Jinrong lowered his eyes and asked. Pei Huan looked at him for a long time before she laughed. She laughed until she cried. "Yes, it's gone. Our marriage has been dissolved." As soon as he woke up, he came to look for Pei Chi. Didn't he know about this? Her heart ached to the extreme. She had loved him before. She had liked him deeply. That kind of pure girl's love was no less than Pei Chi's. But there was only disgust left in his heart. Pei Huan covered her face. "Jinrong, I'm sorry. I'm sorry that I ruined your life. I'm sorry that I took away your love. I'm sorry that I made you see the person you love marry someone else." Lin Jinrong sat there. His pale face was expressionless. After a long time, he asked slowly, "Do you have any other requests?" Pei Huan looked up suddenly and looked at him in shock. She couldn't believe what she had heard. She looked at him for a long time before she lowered her head and smiled bitterly. "No, I don't need any more." She looked up and looked at him deeply. They used to be husband and wife. But now that he was awake, She didn't even have the courage to kiss him. So be it. Lin Jinrong looked at her too. All right then. His wheelchair was pushed away. Pei Huan stood there and looked at him in a daze. Mama Lin's voice was a little tense. Jinrong, don't interact with her in the future. She was really afraid of Pei Huan. If it weren't for the mother and daughter, would Jinrong be so miserable? Lin Jinrong patted the back of his mother's hand and smiled. It's all severed. He was just doing his duty as a husband and asking her what she needed. He knew that Pei Huan had been miserable recently. Pei Huan had schemed against him, but she had conceived a child for him. Although she aborted it, no one loved the child. It was good that it was gone. Lin Jinrong looked down and looked up at the church in front of him silently. He had dreamed of holding his wedding ceremony with Pei Chi here. She must look beautiful in her wedding dress. Today he saw it, but it was worn for someone else. He laughed softly, laughing at his own stupidity. In the limousine, Tang Yu looked at the little girl's red nose and sighed. Pei Chi, we're getting married today. She looked at him. Tang Yu, I'm happy. He couldn't help but sigh again. Pei Chi, I'd rather you be happy because of me. It's all because of you, she whispered coquettishly against his shoulder, remembering to say something he liked to hear. Is that so? Mr. Tang dragged the last syllable a little, but it also had some meaning. Pei Chi felt all the hair on her body stand up, because every time Tang Yu said this, someone was going to be unlucky. At the banquet in the evening, Lin Jinrong didn't appear again. Pei Chi wore a Chinese-style gown and accompanied Tang Yu. There were also a few female companions behind her to take care of her. Tang Yu was newly married and she was pregnant, so he drank without restraint. Halfway through, he was already a little drunk. Old Master Lin saw that the situation wasn't right, so he winked and asked someone to drink on his behalf. With Tang Yu's status, he couldn't be drunk and lose his composure. Besides, this was their wedding night. Chapter 633. Pei Chi went back to the hotel suite first. Tang Yu was helped into the suite about 2 hours later. The room was filled with red, as though it was a wedding night in ancient times. In the red room, his little Chi had taken off her Chinese-style wedding gown and was lying on the huge bed with only her thin underwear. Her hair was brushing against her face, and her features were exquisite like a painting. She was asleep. Tang Yu's body was a little warm from the alcohol he had drunk, and now his blood was even hotter. Reaching out, he pulled open his collar and removed his jacket. Then, he leaned over and whispered into her ear, Chi. Pei Chi flipped over and raised her little face to look at him. Her little face was blushing, and her long eyelashes blinked slightly under the dim yellow light, looking dazzling. Tang Yu reached out to cover her eyes because she was too beautiful. His voice was a little hoarse. Chi. Her little hands hugged his neck, and she didn't say anything. He lowered his head and kissed the corner of her lips lightly, bit by bit. He was so gentle that she wanted to cry, and her body wrapped around him, silently begging him. His passionate breath after he was slightly drunk had also aroused her. She called his name over and over again. Tang Yu, call me hubby. He sounded as though he had bitten her little ear. His voice was elegant and pleasant, and it had a touch of seduction in the middle of the night. Her gaze was watery, and she looked at him softly. After a while, she meowed like a kitten to please him. Tang Yu's gaze was deep. Her thin underwear could not withstand his ravaging, and it hung slanted. Her skin reflected the snow, and it was indescribably seductive. Tang Yu supported himself with one arm, and he exhaled with difficulty as he looked at the seductive little thing under him. Chi, what should I do? His fingers slowly stroked her rosy little mouth, and his voice was a little hoarse. She looked at him innocently, as if he could do whatever he wanted with her. Tang Yu couldn't help but kiss her. His 10 fingers clasped her in a somewhat barbaric manner, not letting her struggle. Her black hair spread out hopelessly like a little beast in despair. The more she behaved like this, the hotter Tang Yu's blood became. He kissed and caressed her. His large palm suddenly grasped her little hand and placed it on his belt. She retracted her little hand, but he coaxed and kissed her while he nimbly led her little hand to do something embarrassing. Nothing could stop Tang Yu from enjoying the tenderness of his wedding night. After a long time, Pei Chi lay on the bright red inner clothes, panting like a little animal. Her body was immediately pulled into a warm embrace. Tang Yu's chin rested on her hair, and his voice was hoarse. Chi, are you okay? She hit him hard with her little hand. This jerk. Tang Yu leaned against her ear, and his voice was slightly hoarse. Go take a shower. Although he was temporarily happy, he didn't dare to indulge himself too much. The little girl hugged him and walked towards the bathroom. Pei Chi was so scared that she screamed, and her little hands hugged his neck. Tang Yu. He was slightly drunk, and she was afraid that she would fall. I won't let go, silly. Tang Yu's voice was hoarse as he lowered his head and kissed her little mouth. Didn't they already have a wedding night and a couple's bath? Early in the morning, Pei Chi was woken up by a prick. When she opened her eyes, she saw Tang Yu's magnified, handsome face, and he was kissing her deeply. She hugged his head and pushed him away. You're always kissing. It's so annoying. Chapter 634. She blushed and buried her face in his arms, not making a sound. Tang Yu chuckled and kissed her for a while before saying, We'll have to serve tea separately when we get up. She replied with an oh. Tang Yu pinched her face. Mrs. Tang, you're so cute. I'm not. She blushed again. He was so hateful. When he said those words, one of his hands was placed somewhere. Tang Yu smiled again. His eyes were full of affection. With just a little bit of force, she would cry out in pain. It was truly a very bad taste. Pei Chi pouted. Pervert. Mr. Tang agreed with her and then slowly began to torture her. He was torturing her while bullying her. Mrs. Tang, is this perverted enough? Pei Chi covered her eyes and refused to look at him. Perverted, perverted, perverted. Tang Yu's level was increasing day by day. Mrs. Tang, is this more perverted, or is this more perverted? Pei Chi's face was pinkish, and her eyelids were pinkish from being bullied. She wanted to cry, but she didn't. He was too harsh, and her eyelashes trembled with a teardrop. When she blinked, it was breathtakingly beautiful. Tang Yu thought it was interesting, but it was not enough. He carried her to the bathroom and bullied her in front of the mirror. As he bullied her, he coaxed her to look at the scene in the mirror. Pei Chi refused. She hugged him tightly and nibbled on his shoulder. Although he wasn't that satisfied, he just bullied her like this, or fed her like this. But he was indescribably gentle, as if it was enough to make her tremble and happy. While torturing her, he stared at the beautiful scene in the mirror and slowly said, Mrs. Tang Bingyao, tell me, when the child is born, will it look like me or you? She did not doubt him. I think it will look like you. She opened her eyes and looked at him. She saw the mirror in front of her. She saw how he bullied her. He let out a sorrowful cry and quickly closed his eyes. This pervert. Pei Chi bit her lips and hugged him coquettishly. He was so bad. Tang Yu chuckled. Be good and call me hubby again. She refused to call him no matter what. She tangled with him until 10:00 before returning to the Lin residence. Although Tang Yu had already restrained himself and didn't really touch her, there were still a few obvious kiss marks on Pei Chi's neck. It was very obvious. Old Master Lin, Lin Yun, and the other elders sat at the head of the table, silently looking at Tang Yu with reproachful gazes. Tang Yu really didn't know how to control himself. Look at the little girl's eyes. They were all green and white. Tang Yu smiled and took the tea from the hands of a young maid. Then, he and Pei Chi knelt down and served the tea. Lin Yun had mixed feelings as she drank the tea, but she finally felt relieved. Don't kneel when you are pregnant. Be careful not to hurt the baby, she said gently and asked Pei Chi to get up. Tang Yu carefully helped his wife up. Beside him, the old man blew his beard and glared at him. You're so precious now. Did you forget last night? Tang Yu smiled. Didn't you get drunk? You have to pay attention to the prenatal education. Old Master Lin snorted. Don't think that you can drink and smoke without restraint. Prenatal education? Chapter 635. She glanced at Tang Yu. Only Mr. Tang could understand the look in her eyes. Tang Yu reached out and held her little hand. He smiled. Chi likes it the most when I give prenatal education to the baby. How could old Master Lin know of his shameless thoughts? He stroked his beard and said, "What nonsense! How can such a young child feel it?" Everyone was silent. Old Master Lin was the one who said that just now. Seeing that everyone was pointing at him, the old man blushed and flew into a rage out of humiliation. "Well, why are you still standing there? Go where you should go. Go and have a honeymoon. Don't think that you can save money just because you got the little girl pregnant." Even Lin Yun couldn't stand it anymore. She called out softly, "Dad." Old Master Lin paused and said dryly, "What I mean is, we can't treat the girl badly." Everyone around them was looking at them with disapproval. The old man looked from one to the other, his face slightly red. After a while, he squeezed out another sentence. "Anyway, a honeymoon is inevitable." Tang Yu smiled. Chi-Chi is pregnant, so she doesn't plan to go abroad. She plans to find a holiday village to stay for half a month. Old Master Lin nodded. "That's good." He looked at Pei Chi-Chi's belly. "It looks like it's a girl." Old Master Lin was quite open-minded. Actually, he didn't need a grandson. A beautiful little girl was more fun. Thinking of that soft and cuddly little girl calling him great-grandfather, that feeling. It was as if he had eaten cotton candy, soft and fluffy. Pei Chi-Chi lowered her head and placed her finger on her belly. Was it a girl? She seemed to like spicy food. After having a meal with Tang Yu at the Lin family's house, Old Master Lin chased her away and said that she was going on a honeymoon. They walked out of the main residence and walked in the lush green courtyard. It was still antique, but probably because of his different state of mind, the scenery seemed more interesting and not as oppressive as before. He held her hand and walked slowly. Suddenly, he paused and said in a low voice, "Jinrong is here. Do you want to meet him?" Pei Chi-Chi looked up at him and shook her head after a while. "Maybe next time." Tang Yu smiled. "Sure." He held her hand and continued to walk forward. After a while, her soft voice came into his ears. "Tang Yu, you seem to be jealous." "No, but your face is a little red." She hugged his arm and stared at his profile. The young, handsome, and elegant man squinted at her. "Pei Chi-Chi, you must be mistaken." Her little hands hugged him tightly like a little girl. Her voice was soft. "Tang Yu, can I still go to Jinrong now and ask him to let me choose again?" "Shut up." This time, Tang Yu directly sealed her little mouth. Initially, he only wanted to gag her little mouth and punish her a little, but slowly, he was moved. Pei Chi-Chi was pushed against the flower rack and kissed intensely. Her little hand hung around his neck, limply. He kissed her again and again. When he finally had enough, he pressed his forehead against hers. He didn't do anything else, just hugging her like this. It was enough. On the second floor, Lin Jinrong sat in a wheelchair and watched the couple kissing under the tree in front of the French window. Chapter 636. Lin Jinrong just looked at her with an unfathomable gaze. Mother Lin went forward and pushed his wheelchair. She said softly, "Jinrong, it's time to take your medicine." Lin Jinrong pursed his lips and didn't say anything. Mother Lin pushed him to the living room outside and said calmly as she got the medicine for him, "Jinrong, don't think about it. She and Tang Yu already have a child. Even if she used to like you, it's impossible for her to be with you. She will choose Tang Yu for the sake of the child." Lin Jinrong silently took the medicine. When Mother Lin straightened up, Lin Jinrong said softly, "Mom, it's not like that." Mother Lin looked at him. Pei Chi-Chi chose Tang Yu because she loves him. "It has nothing to do with the child," Lin Jinrong said softly, as if he was talking to Mother Lin and himself. Mother Lin sighed and forced a smile after a long time. "It's all in the past." Lin Jinrong didn't say anything else. He just asked Mother Lin to help him to the bed and lie down quietly. When Mother Lin closed the door, he picked up a book to read, but he couldn't continue reading. The scene of Tang Yu kissing Pei Chi-Chi kept flashing in front of his eyes. It was like an inner demon had been injected into his body. He didn't know how long it would take for him to forget. In the quiet afternoon, the young man's face was pale. He lay quietly and motionlessly, like a quiet painting. Slowly, it froze. Pei Chi-Chi and Tang Yu took a private plane to a holiday villa in the south. It took 10 minutes to walk from one villa to another, so the privacy of the guests was greatly guaranteed. In addition to enjoying the warm time with the two of them, Tang Yu would also take Pei Chi-Chi to the ancient town to play and buy some toys that little girls liked. Of course, nighttime was the time that she loved and feared the most. Tang Yu would always think of ways to torture her with all kinds of evil tastes. She was seriously pregnant, and he was hyperactive. Every time, she wanted to reject him, but every time, she would be seduced by him. That night, Tang Yu slowly bullied her, but his mind was thinking about something. On the afternoon of their wedding day, he took her to see Tang Ziyuan. Tang Ziyuan talked to him alone for a while. At that time, his father said this, "Tang Yu, even though you aren't related to Pei Chi-Chi by blood, Pei Chi-Chi calls you brother and Pei Chi-Chi sister. I can't help but feel like the two of you are in cahoots." At this moment, the elder brother was bullying the little girl. He lowered his head and his little wife was crying softly. Her eyelids were pink, and her body was trembling because of his bullying. She wrapped herself around him for a long time, not moving at all. Tang Yu stretched out his hand and teased his little puppy, Chi-Chi. However, she began to cry fiercely. Her fragile state was extremely interesting to him. It turned out that his family's baby's pregnancy was like this. Just like that, 10 days passed as they continued to tangle around each other. Pei Chi-Chi didn't want to stay with him like this anymore. It was simply indescribable. Early in the morning, Tang Yu was shaving. There was a little person behind him, hugging his waist and pressing her face against his back. "Tang Yu, I want to eat outside. I want to play." Tang Yu looked at the little person in the mirror and slowly said, "Mrs. Tang, the food you eat now is almost comparable to the emperor's tributes in the past, and you want to play?" Chapter 637. Looking at the way she was glaring at him, he found it funny in his heart. He took her from behind and placed her in his arms. His voice was husky and seductive. "Pei Chi-Chi, let's not talk about the outside, even inside." Her face turned red. He was shameless. Tang Yu chuckled, pulled her into his arms, and kissed her. "I'll take you out to play later." Pei Chi-Chi wiped her lower lip in disgust. "You're the one who shaved." The shaving water hadn't been cleaned yet. Tang Yu let go of her, smiled, and continued to shave. His movements were elegant and pleasing to the eye. Well, Pei Chi-Chi had to admit that Mr. Tang was very attractive even when he was shaving. She ran far away and lay on the bed, waiting for her master like a puppy. When he walked out refreshed, he picked up the little thing and said in a low voice, "Brother will take you out to play." Pei Chi-Chi bit his good-looking chin. Pervert. He was about to be a pervert when the phone next to the bed rang. Tang Yu propped himself up, took a look, and took the phone. "It's yours." Pei Chi-Chi lay on his waist and looked at the call. It was an unfamiliar number. She thought about it and picked it up. "I'm Pei Chi-Chi." She didn't know what the other side said, but Pei Chi-Chi's expression changed slightly. After a while, she pursed her lips and hung up. "What's wrong?" Tang Yu's voice was a little hoarse. "It seems that we have to change our plan." Pei Chi-Chi looked at him and said, "Tang Yu, if I say that I care about Pei Huan again, will you think that I'm a very good person?" Tang Yu wasn't surprised. His Chi-Chi was actually very soft-hearted. Pei Huan was a willful and arrogant girl, but she had grown up with Pei Chi-Chi, not to mention that most of it was because of Pei Mingyi. "If you decide, I don't mind." He reached out and stroked her hair. "It's just that there are some things that you can leave to me. Put the child and yourself first, okay?" His voice was gentle and slow. In fact, up until today, Pei Chi-Chi had been involved in or provoked more or less some danger, and those were things that Tang Yu was unwilling to let Pei Chi-Chi get involved in. Pei Chi-Chi nodded obediently. Her soft look made him feel a little evil. He covered her head with the quilt and hugged her. His voice was a little hoarse. "I'll go out and deal with it. Wait for me here. Don't run around." As he spoke, he kissed her through the blanket again. Pei Chi-Chi poked her head out. "Don't talk to her." Tang Yu smiled. This little fool was clearly afraid that Pei Huan would seduce him, but he couldn't bear to leave Pei Huan. In fact, she didn't even know how soft her heart was. Tang Yu drove a black BMW out and drove to a high-class club. Just now, Meng Qingqing had already called and said that this club was famous for being involved in illegal activities. High-class female stars sold money, drugs, and everything else. He guessed that Pei Huan was involved in everything. The black sports car stopped at the entrance of the club. Although he wasn't a member, his temperament made the doorman not dare to stop him. He let him in just like that. As soon as Tang Yu entered, he said to the club manager in a low voice, "I'm looking for a girl with the surname Pei." The manager suddenly looked a little embarrassed. Was it that Pei Huan? Chapter 638. Pei Huan, that has-been celebrity, had agreed to sleep with young Master Ing for a night. But at the last minute, Pei Huan was unwilling. At this moment, she was being held captive and naked photos were taken. Most importantly, there was a video of her smoking that thing. She was being held there. She couldn't get away without a free night's sleep. He didn't know what was wrong with that girl. Everyone was having a good time at first, but she suddenly turned hostile. It was just a matter of sleeping. Which celebrity wouldn't sleep with her? Did she really think that she was some international movie queen? She was too naive. The manager hesitated. Tang Yu said in a deep voice, "Why? Do I not have the right to do so?" When his face darkened, he naturally had a kind of prestige. The manager glanced at him and immediately went in. As he led the way, he made a phone call to inform the other side. When Tang Yu saw Pei Huan, he glanced at her. She was sitting on a chair with her hands tied and her clothes in a mess. Her long hair was wet and stuck to her face. She looked extremely pathetic, and there were traces of soot on her body. Tang Yu only glanced at her quietly. Then, he looked around. It was probably a gathering of the famous people in the South to have some fun with the celebrities. However, these people weren't ordinary people. Tang Yu only needed to take a glance to understand a few things in his heart. There seemed to be 4 or 5 financial backers, as well as a few small celebrities and models. Pei Huan might have spoiled the mood of these people. When Tang Yu came over, young Master Ing stood up and walked over slowly. "Mr. Tang, in terms of power, all of us here can't even compare to a finger of yours. But when we're out to have fun, we have to have rules, don't you think so?" Tang Yu nodded.
Yes.
Young Master Ing was a very devilishly charming young man. He looked at Pei Huan and smiled. "Actually, I don't really like this girl. If Mr. Tang likes her, I don't mind taking her in. I just know her. I was asked by someone." Tang Yu said calmly, "Do you have any other rules here?" Young Master Ing turned around to look at his group of people who were having fun. He rubbed his lips with his fair and beautiful fingers and slowly walked to Pei Huan. Pei Huan was being held, and her face was pale. She looked at Tang Yu and said in a hoarse voice, "I don't want her fake kindness." If possible, Tang Yu would not care about her life or death, not to mention that this woman was still clamoring here. Tang Yu's gaze fell on her, and he said in a low voice, "If it weren't for her fake kindness, you wouldn't have been able to walk out of here today." Pei Huan pursed her pale lips tightly and did not speak again. Young Master Ing laughed. "It seems that Mrs. Tang asked Mr. Tang to come." Young Master Ing was dressed in black, with black trousers and a black shirt. His skin was fair, and his facial features were exquisite. He looked like the type who specialized in seducing young girls. His eyes met with Tang Yu's, and he tilted his head. If it's because of Mrs. Tang, then it's even easier. Chapter 639. Tang Yu's eyes were filled with anger, but his tone was extremely calm. "It seems that you guys play like this a lot?" Young Master Ing didn't care at all. He picked up a glass of red wine and shrugged. "We're all out to have fun. This girl broke the rules, so of course we can't just take her away. Otherwise, how are we going to survive in the future?" He handed the glass of wine in his hand forward with a smile on his face. Tang Yu glanced at Pei Huan again with a cold expression. Did she know who she had messed with? Although he had never met young Master Ing, he had heard of him. He was someone that Pei Huan shouldn't have messed with. Young Master Ing was not so much a second-generation rich kid, but a second-generation politician. His background was unimaginable. No matter how much money Tang Yu had, he couldn't compete with him. Giving him a choice was already giving him face. Otherwise, Pei Huan would have died here today. Tang Yu took the glass of wine and smiled. "Young Master Ing, you're a man of your word." "Of course." Young Master Ing chuckled. But let me remind you, Mr. Tang, is it worth the risk for such a woman? Tang Yu didn't answer. Instead, he drank the glass of wine. He tilted his head back and the wine slid down his throat. His Adam's apple swelled up and he looked very sexy. Pei Huan stared at him with her eyes wide open. She couldn't believe it. After Tang Yu drank, young Master Ing clapped his hands and said, "Mr. Tang, please help yourself." The people behind him were ready to make a move, but young Master Ing stopped them. "Let them go." He smiled at Tang Yu and said, "There's no cure for this drug, only women. But I heard that Mrs. Tang is pregnant, so take care, Mr. Tang." Young Master Ing took the wine from the waiter and drank it down. An enchanting woman automatically wrapped herself around him and kissed his lips. Her whole body was like a snake spirit wrapping around him. Tang Yu looked at her quietly and pulled Pei Huan up. "Let's go." He didn't untie Pei Huan and just pulled her out. When the door closed, young Master Ing pushed the woman away, wiped the blood from his lips and sneered. "I admire him for being able to endure it." The woman was thrown to the ground, but she stubbornly crawled towards him again. Her little hands nimbly covered his body, trying to seduce him. Young Master Ing looked coldly at the woman who was squatting and serving him. He played with women, but it was usually women who served him. He rarely took the initiative to touch them because he thought they were dirty. Tang Yu threw Pei Huan into the back seat of the car. Pei Huan was still in shock. Firstly, he didn't expect to escape so easily. Secondly, he was shocked that Tang Yu was willing to drink that thing. She thought of that wine. She knew that there was something wrong with that wine. It was very strong. Young Master Ing and the others liked to drink that stuff. She looked at Tang Yu's back view. He was driving and looked very normal. Pei Huan suddenly licked her lips and said seductively, "Tang Yu, are you feeling very uncomfortable now?" "Yes," he said. "Because you're in the car." "Pei Huan, if it wasn't for Chi-Chi, I would have thrown you out right now." How could he not know what Pei Huan was thinking? Just like what Pei Huan often said about Pei Chi-Chi, Pei Huan was now an ingrate. His voice was very cold and Pei Huan didn't dare to act rashly. Chapter 640. Tang Yu did not speak for a long time. Pei Huan was proud of herself and wanted to tease him again. Tang Yu said, "Pei Huan, if you look at yourself in the mirror, you will know how pathetic you look. Do you think that all men will have thoughts about you when they see you?" She had overestimated herself and underestimated Tang Yu. If he had a reaction to her just because he drank a cup of medicine, then he did not deserve to say that he loved Chi-Chi. Pei Huan froze and did not say anything. Her self-esteem had been completely destroyed by Tang Yu. Really, there was not a single shred of it left. He was being polite, but she understood the underlying meaning. There was silence in the car. Pei Huan did not dare to say anything else, but she was getting more and more uneasy. The thought of her being seen by Pei Chi-Chi in this state made her feel annoyed. That feeling was not good. It was as if she had lowered herself to Pei Chi-Chi. The car stopped. Pei Huan shrank in the back seat and bit her lip. "I'm not going in. I don't want to see Pei Chi-Chi." Tang Yu looked at her without saying a word. Then, as she wished, he pulled her out of the car and threw her on the ground. Pei Huan was still tied up and her clothes were in a mess. She saw that Tang Yu was really going to leave and shouted anxiously, "I'll go in, I'll go in." She cried as she said that. Her tears and snot flew. There had never been a man who treated her like this. Moreover, it was a man who was drugged and did not even see her as a woman. Tang Yu paused and looked at Pei Huan. She followed behind him in a pathetic state. At this moment, Pei Huan's smoking addiction was acting up. Her face was pale and her body was trembling. She followed behind Tang Yu and entered the villa. It was almost noon. The sun shone into the quiet courtyard and it looked indescribably warm. Tang Yu's forehead was covered with a thin layer of sweat as he walked in slowly. Pei Huan followed behind him, and every step was difficult. She was afraid that she would see Pei Chi-Chi sneer at her and say, "Pei Huan, you have such a day?" She was even more afraid that Pei Chi-Chi would tell Jinrong. However, she saw Pei Chi-Chi in the small kitchen, dressed in a white men's shirt and a pair of black shorts, cooking in front of the kitchen counter. The sunlight outside shone on her body in a slanted manner, creating a charming halo. It was wonderful, quiet, and beautiful. Pei Huan just watched like that. Her eyes were filled with tears. Compared to Pei Chi-Chi's calmness, Pei Huan felt dirty. It was dirty from the inside out. She looked at him and closed her eyes slightly. Her whole body was cold. The sun could not warm her, nor could it touch her cold heart. Beads of cold sweat seeped out of Pei Huan's forehead. Pei Huan's lips moved, but he felt that it was terrifyingly dry. Pei Chi-Chi turned her head and looked at them. Tang Yu went over and hugged her. His voice was a little hoarse. Chi-Chi, I might do something worse than a beast. To you later. He kissed her gently and meticulously. He did not look like he was going to do something like a beast. However, she felt that his heart was beating a little fast. She looked up at him and was stunned. The look in his eyes was something she had never seen before. She opened her mouth slightly and looked at him in a daze. She could not say a word. Tang Yu reached out and patted her little head comfortingly. Then, he grabbed her with one hand and dragged Pei Huan with the other. He locked Pei Huan, who was crying in snot, in an empty room and locked the door. Chapter 641. Pei Chi-Chi already knew about it, but seeing Pei Huan like this, she still felt a little sad. Tang Yu's Adam's apple bobbed vigorously. He held her in his arms and said in a hoarse voice, Pei Chi-Chi, I'm not feeling any better than she is now. She raised her head to look at him. After a while, he carried her in his arms and walked upstairs. Pei Huan was screaming, cursing, and crying inside, but her voice was getting further and further away. Pei Chi-Chi frowned and hit Tang Yu's shoulder. Tang Yu, I'm pregnant. Ever since she was pregnant, he had never really wanted her, including on their wedding night. But now, his body was so firm and hot. Tang Yu lowered his head. His bright and passionate eyes were filled with desire, and his Adam's apple bobbed sexily. After a while, he said in a hoarse voice, Don't worry, I know what I'm doing. I won't hurt you. With that said, he kicked open the bedroom door. That's strength. Pei Chi-Chi closed her eyes. This was called knowing what he was doing? Tang Yu's footsteps were heavy as he walked to the bedside and carefully put her down. His movements were restrained. When he bent down, Pei Chi-Chi's fingers gripped the bedsheets tightly. Fine sweat seeped out and stained the white bedsheets bit by bit. She was like a lily blooming to her heart's content. In a low voice, Pei Chi-Chi cupped his burning hot handsome face and pressed her forehead against his. Tang Yu, you're the one who's been drugged, not me. In exchange, he kissed her deeply. Then, she was carried up, and her long hair was wrapped around both of them. In the following time, Pei Chi-Chi deeply understood what it meant to be worse than a beast. When everything was calm again, she was lying on Tang Yu's chest with sweat all over her body, and her little hand was pinching him. Her little mouth was numb, and so were her fingers, beast. On the other hand, the beast was very satisfied. He chuckled and grabbed her little mouth. His voice was low and hoarse as he said, Chi-Chi, I'm a little tired. If you still want, I have to rest for a while. She slapped him angrily. She was clearly the one who had done all the work. Tang Yu chuckled and pulled her into his arms. In fact, this kind of thing, even if a man did not move, after 4 or 5 times, his energy would be almost exhausted. Pei Chi-Chi raised her head in his arms and asked softly, Then Pei Huan, just leave her alone? It's good to let her suffer a little. Tang Yu said heavily, Otherwise, she'll continue to be willful forever. He did not want to tell Pei Chi-Chi about what happened at young Master Ying's place. She didn't ask, and he wouldn't say. He hugged her and took a nap. When he woke up, it was already 2:00 in the afternoon. Tang Yu went to heat up the dishes she had cooked earlier, while Pei Chi-Chi ran to release Pei Huan. As soon as she opened the door, she was stunned. Because Pei Huan had been locked up there, he had lost control. Looking at Pei Chi-Chi's pale and moist face, Pei Huan's eyes were full of fierceness. Pei Chi-Chi, I won't be grateful to you. Pei Chi-Chi looked at Pei Huan. She had never seen her like this. Since young, Pei Huan had always loved to be beautiful, like a little princess. Now that she was in such a sorry state, it was somewhat comical. Pei Chi-Chi did not immediately go to untie her, but leaned against the door with a chuckle in her eyes. I didn't ask for your gratitude. Also, what's the use of asking for it? Pei Huan was speechless for a moment. Yeah, what could she bring to Pei Chi now? Chapter 642. Pei Huan glared at her. Aren't you afraid that I'll push you now? You're pregnant. If you have the guts, you won't be called Pei Huan anymore. Pei Chi's hands didn't stop moving, and her tone was still very indifferent. Pei Huan just wanted to cry when she heard that. She raised her head and didn't want to admit that the person who understood her the most in this world was Pei Chi, who she hated the most. Pei Chi untied Pei Huan and stood up slowly. Go wash yourself and then eat. Leave after eating. Pei Huan was stunned for a long time before she asked with difficulty, Aren't you going to ask me what happened between me and Tang Yu? Pei Chi looked her up and down and smiled. If anything can happen between him and you, I can only say that his taste is really heavy. Pei Huan felt deeply insulted, and she glared at Pei Chi. This is the last time. Pei Huan, this is the last time I care about you. Pei Chi said seriously, No matter what happens in the future, you have to bear it yourself. Pei Huan looked up at Pei Chi and her lips moved, but she didn't say anything in the end. Even Pei Chi didn't want to care about her. Pei Chi walked out. Go to the dining room after you've washed up. There's a change of clothes in the bathroom. When she walked to the dining room, Tang Yu had already served her lunch. Pei Chi sat down and looked at him eagerly. My mouth is numb. Mr. Tang smiled and leaned over to kiss her. Is it still numb? Pei Chi grunted and pouted her lips, but she still obediently ate her food. Tang Yu reached out and touched her as if she was a child. Pei Chi lowered her head and ate obediently. In fact, although her hands and mouth were numb, he was really very gentle. For a man who had been drugged, Tang Yu's ability to control himself was enough to make people's hair stand on end. Pei Huan stood at the door, watching this heartwarming scene. Originally, she had pulled her shirt up to her shoulders to piss off Pei Chi. But after seeing this scene, she pulled up her clothes. He felt ashamed of himself for doing that. He sat quietly beside the couple and ate without saying a word. Pei Chi looked at her, but Tang Yu treated her as if she was transparent. This made Pei Huan feel even more uneasy. She wasn't full after eating a small bowl. Pei Huan looked up and pushed the bowl in front of Pei Chi. He still wanted to eat. Before Pei Chi could speak, Tang Yu said in a low voice, Don't you have hands? Pei Huan said naturally, In the past, it was always Pei Chi who scooped rice for me. Now I'm serving Pei Chi. Do I have to serve you too? Tang Yu's voice was a little cold. Pei Huan swallowed hard and then went to serve herself with her tail tucked between her legs. It had to be said that Pei Chi's cooking was very good, and Pei Huan hadn't eaten such delicious food in a long time. After eating, she still wanted to stay, but Tang Yu directly packed her up and threw a few hundred yuan to her car, telling her to get lost. Pei Chi looked at his neat appearance, leaned against the door, and looked at him deeply. It seems that you really hate Pei Huan. Mr. Tang walked in slowly, and when he passed by her, he said proudly, A woman can be ugly and not cute, but she's so confident that every man will want her. That's hateful and hateful. Pei Chi nodded and didn't say anything else. Chapter 643. Mr. Tang was sitting in the study, smoking. When he saw her come in, he immediately put out the cigarette and looked at her with amusement. Pei Chi, what do you think? It should be the good-looking and cute kind? Pei Chi said. Tang Yu looked at her. You're really overconfident. She climbed onto his lap boldly and nibbled his chin. Tang Yu, thank you. She was referring to Pei Huan. Tang Yu glanced at her and then chuckled. Pei Chi, I've already accepted the gift. If it weren't for Pei Huan, if it weren't for him being drugged, if he didn't care about her body, or if he couldn't bear to treat her like that, he would have really done it today. It was satisfying. She knew that he was being naughty again, so she was a little shy, so she reached out and hugged his waist. Tang Yu sighed. Chi, you should let Pei Huan grow up. I know. I've told her. She pressed against him, her voice like a little lamb. Tang Yu lowered his head and kissed the soft little guy. Pei Chi pushed him away with some disgust. You smell like smoke. Tang Yu picked her up. I just took a puff. He kissed her so intensely that even her toes curled up. Because of Pei Huan, it was a little strange when they played. So they didn't stay for long and returned to B City after 3 or 4 days. As soon as they returned to B City, they received the news that Pei Chi had won the B City Entrepreneur Award. Old Master Lin celebrated at home, saying that his little daughter-in-law had made the Lin family proud. Lin Yun was a little helpless. Now Old Master Lin really thought that Tang Yu's surname was Lin. On the second day back, they went back to the Lin family. Old Master Lin opened a few tables at home to welcome them. For the first time, Lin Yun brought Zhaoyi back to the Lin family. It could be considered as giving Zhaoyi a status. Most importantly, for the sake of Pei Chi and the child in Pei Chi's belly, Lin Yun asked Tang Yu to bring Tang Xian over. When Tang Yu went to pick up Tang Xian, Tang Ziyuan was there as well. Hearing this, Tang Ziyuan naturally wanted to join in the fun. The fun was fake. He just wanted to get close to Lin Yun. Tang Yu was silent for a while, then said faintly, Dad, she has already decided to be with Uncle Zhao. Tonight, Uncle Zhao will also be going. As soon as Tang Yu finished speaking, Tang Ziyuan's old face froze. Had Yunyun really decided to be with Zhaoyi? He had just convinced the young model to abort the child. He wanted to talk to Yunyun, but she had already decided to be with Zhaoyi. In that instant, Tang Ziyuan's eyes lost their spirit and darkened a lot. From his previous high spirits to his current frustration, it was reflected vividly in this instant. Tang Yu's heart almost softened. He could only sigh. After a long time, Tang Ziyuan said softly, It's good that Tang Xian can go. In the future, there will be more people to take care of her. This child is always a little lonely living here. As he said this, he looked up at his son and repeated what he said. He didn't even know what he was saying. All these years, he had missed Lin Yun, missed her, and wanted to have her again. But in his heart, there was always some not-so-bright thoughts. He wanted to not divorce Zhao Ku and still be able to relive old memories with Yun Yun. Chapter 644. Perhaps Lin Yun still had feelings for him, but more than that, she hated him. She was such a proud and arrogant woman. How could she want him? He was thinking too much. Holding his forehead, he sat down slowly and said to Tang Xian gently, You and your brother should go. You can stay for a few days and... He looked up at Tang Yu. Pei Chi is fine. Tang Yu smiled and did not say anything. He just patted his father's shoulder. Tang Ziyuan was a little dazed. That was the sympathy between men. Tang Ziyuan smiled bitterly. Don't worry about me. I'm used to it after so many years. He was used to not having Lin Yun. But he did not say that he was not used to Lin Yun belonging to someone else. She was going to marry that man. Tang Xian called for her father like a kitten. Tang Ziyuan touched his head and smiled bitterly. Daddy is fine. He deserved it. Tang Xian threw herself into his arms. Then I won't go. I'll stay with Daddy. Go. Tang Ziyuan cheered. Go have some fun. You haven't seen your Chi for a long time. Tang Xian was still worried when she left, looking back every few steps. When she arrived at the Lin family, although she felt uncomfortable, she still sneaked a peek at Big Aunt and her man. He looked younger and more handsome than her father. Tang Xian whimpered and did not dare to look anymore. Zhao Ke's death probably made Lin Yun more indifferent, so she took good care of Tang Xian when she came. When the banquet was about to start, Lin Jinrong was pushed out by Mother Lin. Pei Chi's body was a little stiff. Tang Yu patted her hand and said in a low voice, You will see Jinrong often in the future. Are you sure you want to see him like a mouse seeing a cat? She glanced at him but did not say anything. Tang Xian sat beside Pei Chi. She stared at Lin Jinrong with her spiky little head that looked like a steel needle. She had seen him before, but this time was different. He was someone that Chi used to like. She used to think that he was very handsome, but now, it seemed that he had a different kind of temperament. It was an indescribable feeling. Tang Xian stared at him for a long time before she could think of a word to describe it. Fellow sufferers. He couldn't walk now and was sitting in a wheelchair, while she was bald. Wasn't it just as pitiful? Sensing her gaze, Lin Jinrong looked in her direction with a hint of coldness in his eyes. How fierce. Tang Xian averted her gaze. Old Master Lin's face was flushed as he raised his glass. Don't be too restrained. This is a family banquet. It can also be considered a celebration for Tang Yu's wife to win a big prize. Also, our Jinrong has woken up. Mother Lin's mouth twitched. Jinrong had been awake for half a month, but he didn't see Old Master celebrating. Now that Pei Chi had won an award, why would he want to celebrate? Was it because he didn't think it was fun to watch the cousins fight? Everyone had the same thoughts as Mother Lin. Lin Jinrong smiled faintly and raised his cup. He looked at Pei Chi and said magnanimously, Chi, congratulations. That atmosphere. It was fine if he didn't call her cousin-in-law. He could have just called her Pei Chi, but he actually called her Chi. How intimate. Even from afar, one could smell the jealousy on Tang Yu's body. However, their Tang Yu was still calm. Even so, he could still smile and drink a cup for Pei Chi. Chapter 645. Old Master Sheng looked at them with an indescribable expression on his face. The meal was also eaten in silence. Only Old Master Sheng laughed happily from time to time, as if he didn't mind the matter getting out of hand. After the meal, Tang Yu brought Pei Chi back for lunch. Tang Xian ran to Old Master Sheng's library to look for books. Old Master Sheng had collected many out-of-print books, and he said that she could pick 2 to bring back. The huge library was a few hundred square meters in size. Tang Xian walked around for a long time, but she couldn't find anything she liked. She didn't go to school, but Zhaoko had hired the best tutors for her, so Tang Xian knew more than people her age. She walked slowly and walked around a row of bookshelves. Finally, she saw an out-of-print picture book on top of a bookshelf that she had been eyeing for a long time. It was a rare book from an Italian master, but she was too small, and she couldn't reach it at all. After hopping around for a long time, she ran to a flower rack and placed it on it. Then, she climbed up to get the book herself. The flower rack was too narrow. She couldn't stand on it, and her body swayed. She was afraid, but she couldn't bear to let go of the book. She held onto the shelf to reach it, but before she could reach it, her body tilted, and she fell straight down. She didn't feel the pain she expected. Instead, she fell into a warm embrace. It was a skinny, but strong embrace. She didn't know what her nose had hit, but she felt a little pain. Tang Xian was on the verge of tears. She looked up and stared at the handsome face in front of her. It was Lin Jinrong. At this moment, she was lying in his arms, and he was sitting in a wheelchair. God, did she hit him just now? Or did he think that she was throwing herself into his arms? Tang Xian stuttered, I didn't do it on purpose. Lin Jinrong replied absent-mindedly. He looked deeply at the girl in his arms, and after a while, he said in a low voice, I know. He looked at her. Why aren't you coming down? When she fell just now, he didn't have to catch her. There was a thick blanket on the floor anyway, so she wouldn't fall, but he still did the good deed and caught her. His gaze was a little startled, because she and Pei Chi looked 60% alike, the 2 little faces overlapping. However, Tang Xian's appearance was sweet, while Pei Chi's was more elegant. As he stared at her, Tang Xian let out a cry and immediately got up, her face red and her heart beating fast. She muttered in her heart. She didn't know where her nose had bumped into him. No, it seemed that her lips had also touched something soft. Tang Xian's eyes widened. Could it be that she kissed him? Lin Jinrong did not express any dissatisfaction at being stared at so directly by a little girl. He only lightly asked, Do you want to take the book up there? Tang Xian nodded. She pointed at the picture book that had been on her mind for a long time. That's it. Looking at her short legs, Lin Jinrong smiled faintly and stood up. Under Tang Xian's shocked gaze, he stood up. When he was sitting in the wheelchair, he didn't feel much pressure. But now that he was standing, his body was slender and tall. He was almost a head taller than her, at least 8 meters. Tang Xian stood in front of him like a little doll, and Lin Jinrong was wearing a pair of gray casual pants and a white shirt, simple and clean. Chapter 646. His looks were perfect for a first love. Even our 17-year-old Tang Xian's heart palpitated at the sight of him. So handsome, so handsome. But why was he sitting in a wheelchair when he could stand up? Lin Jinrong was very tall and easily got the book she wanted. Tang Xian glanced at it and was about to thank him when she saw the pained expression on Lin Jinrong's face. He sat on the wheelchair again, panting. Tang Xian was scared out of her wits. She squatted down and touched his chest. Lin Jinrong, what's wrong? She asked anxiously. Was he going to become a vegetable again? Lin Jinrong grabbed her little hand and stopped her from moving. He panted for a while before glaring at her. Did she know what her actions meant to the man just now? It meant seduction. He looked at her deeply. Tang Xian's heart was beating fast. She was angry at him for not fighting back. Her face was red and her heart was racing. Lin Jinrong looked at her for a while and pushed her hand away. His voice was stiff. Don't do this again. Tang Xian was stunned as she watched him push the wheelchair out. She grabbed his wheelchair from behind. What did I do just now? Young Master Lin pushed the wheelchair again, but the little one was stubbornly holding on to it. He could not move. He was embarrassed and angry. This was a shameful thing for a man. How could a little girl handle him? Let go. His voice was cold. Tang Xian was a practical girl. She asked again, what did I do just now? I was worried that you would die, so I touched you. Lin Jinrong, can your brain not be filled with those dirty, colored trash? The little girl said sternly. Lin Jinrong turned the wheelchair around and looked at her deeply. What do you think I was thinking about? Did I press you down and kiss you? Or did I tear your clothes? Tang Xian was shocked. Her mouth was trembling and her eyes were wide open. After a while, she screamed, You're shameless. Lin Jinrong pulled her over, and she sat straight on his lap. His leg was actually hurting, but he insisted on teaching this arrogant little girl a lesson. His fingers gently pinched her little face. Tell me, are you thinking about these things? Tang Xian shook her head like a little bunny, obviously scared out of her wits. Lin Jinrong fell into a trance again as he looked at that little face. He didn't know why he was so serious with her. Perhaps it was because she was too similar to Chi-Chi. But now, he wanted to let go of her because she wasn't Pei Chi-Chi after all. Tang Xian was a little disappointed when she let go of her. Just now, she saw a trace of pain in his eyes. When he looked at her, it was as if he was looking at Chi-Chi. Landing on the ground, she looked at him and asked pitifully, Do you still like Chi-Chi now? Lin Jinrong pushed his wheelchair out. His voice had returned to being cold. You think too much. Tang Xian stared at his back. She felt a little lonely, and her heart ached. It was as if she couldn't bear to part with him. After a while, she muttered, Actually, Chi-Chi isn't the only one who is suitable for you. He paused at the door. Chapter 647. How much do you know? Little brat. Lin Jinrong said in a low voice. Tang Xian waved her little fist. I'm not a little brat. He suddenly said viciously, Just now, I touched you. Little brat, you haven't developed yet, right? 14 this year, or 13? The 17-year-old girl was humiliated. I'm 17. Your IQ isn't there, and your body isn't there either. He concluded nastily before pushing the wheelchair out. As soon as he went out, he saw his mother. Mama Lin looked at her son in surprise because he was actually smiling. Jinrong, why are you so happy? Mama Lin was in a good mood as she pushed him towards the bedroom. Lin Jinrong reached out to touch his face. Was he smiling? It's all right, he said lightly. I saw a little fool in the book just now. It's quite interesting. Mama Lin sighed. Don't lock yourself in the study all day. Go out and get some sun. It'll help your recovery. Lin Jinrong nodded. I know, Mom. Don't worry. I'll be able to walk normally in less than half a year. He could only stand for a while now, and he couldn't use any strength. It was painful when he helped that little fool carry the book just now. Thinking of that little fool, Lin Jinrong's lips curled into a faint smile again. That little fool was quite interesting. However, he lied. It wasn't that she didn't have any. Although it wasn't big, it was like a steamed bun. It had the shape, and the texture was not bad. That's right, he had accidentally touched her. Lin Jinrong was in a good mood all day, which was rare. However, when he saw the news about Pei Huan in the newspaper, his heart sank again. Mama Lin looked at the newspaper on the table and could see why he was in a bad mood. It's all in the past. Don't think about it anymore. Mama Lin patted him. Lin Jinrong looked forward for a long time before saying softly, "Mom, do you believe me? I have expectations for that child." Because Pei Huan was Pei Chi-Chi's younger sister, that child should more or less resemble Chi-Chi. In his body, there was 1/8 of Pei Chi-Chi's blood. Mama Lin was sad and didn't say anything else. That was the child's fate. It was destined not to be born. Lin Jinrong looked down. "I'm going to the courtyard to relax. I need some peace and quiet." Mother Lin nodded. "I'll push you back later." Lin Jinrong walked out on his own and slowly walked out. On the summer solstice, the wisteria in the courtyard was in full bloom, and the air was filled with a sweet fragrance. He was on one side, and Pei Chi-Chi was on the other. When their gazes met, they were stunned. The short distance of 10 meters was all they had to cover. After a long time, Pei Chi-Chi walked over and stood still. "Long time no see." He lowered his eyes and said lightly. Pei Chi-Chi walked behind him and pushed his wheelchair. She said slowly, "Jinrong, let me push you for a walk." His eyes were a little hot, and it took him a long time to restrain himself. "Pei Chi-Chi, don't think that I will forgive you for breaking your promise. I know, so I can keep pushing you until your leg is healed." She promised seriously. "If you still can't walk when my child is born, I will let my child push his uncle." He turned his head and glared at her. "Pei Chi-Chi, you are cursing me. I'm provoking you." She looked at him with a smile. "Think about it. The little guy might even push your wheelchair over, pour sand in, or dress your wheelchair up as a princess car." Chapter 648. Pei Chi-Chi looked at him and smiled. "I'll push you." She pushed him forward. Lin Jinrong snorted. "Pei Chi-Chi, don't think too highly of yourself. I've forgotten everything that happened in the past." After he said that, there was no reply for a long time. Pei Chi-Chi clenched her fists on her knees and said, "Yeah, I've forgotten too." That beautiful moment was sealed in their own memories, never to be mentioned again, never to be touched. Perhaps, when they were old, they would occasionally remember meeting each other when they were in their best years. On the campus, under the pear blossoms, they would remember each other's faces with just one glance. After that, they did not speak again. She just accompanied him for a walk. It was as if she was accompanying him on a walk that they had never taken before. Silence, tranquility, beauty. Lin Jinrong asked her softly, "Pei Chi-Chi, aren't you tired?" He remembered that she was pregnant. Pei Chi-Chi stopped and said, "A little." Unknowingly, they had walked for more than an hour. And this mansion was ridiculously huge. They did not even walk one round after more than an hour. How perverted. "I can push you when we go back." Lin Jinrong's voice was a little faint. Then, he looked up and saw Tang Yu walking over from the opposite side. He was dressed in a blue robe and had not lost a single bit of weight compared to before. Pei Chi-Chi stood and looked at Tang Yu coming over. "Why did you run so far?" He walked over and reached out to rub her fluffy little head. He took her hand and pushed Jinrong, and they walked back slowly. Pei Chi-Chi glanced at him. Seeing that he wasn't angry, she tugged at his sleeve and followed behind him. "We're just taking a walk, and we'll be far away." Was he really not jealous? Not angry? Pei Chi-Chi really did not dare to believe it. Because when they lived in Xia City, Jinrong only came once. When Jinrong left, he went crazy and tormented her. Now, she had been alone with Jinrong for more than an hour, and he did not have any reaction at all? Pei Chi-Chi felt uneasy at first, but Tang Yu's expression remained the same. He even chatted with Jinrong about business matters. From what she heard, it seemed that Jinrong would not return to school and would directly enter the Lin organization. She didn't make a sound. She held onto Tang Yu's arm and quietly listened to their conversation. Before she knew it, she had already walked back. When Mother Lin saw the three of them appear at the same time, she was quite surprised. That scene was indescribably harmonious. All right, that's all for now. Lin Jinrong turned around and smiled. By the way, I haven't given you any gifts for your wedding yet. His voice was soft. Mom, bring me the box in my room. Mother Lin subconsciously looked at Tang Yu. Tang Yu's expression was normal. He was really especially calm. Only then did she bring it over. A delicately packaged box was placed in Lin Jinrong's hands. Lin Jinrong took it and looked at it for a while. Then he looked up and put it in Pei Qiqi's hands. It's not something valuable. Take it. I made it myself. Pei Qiqi hummed in agreement. Her eyes were a little wet. She held it in her hands and hugged it tightly. Tang Yu took it for her. The little girl was still a little unwilling. She squeezed it a little harder. Mr. Tang stared at her, and she finally let go. Aunt, Jinrong, I'll take Qiqi back to rest first. Tang Yu smiled. Chapter 649. Pei Qiqi was taken aback by Mama Lin's fervent gaze. She stammered to Tang Yu, "Let's go then." She took the initiative to pull him away. Tang Yu smiled. After walking for a few meters, he rubbed her little head. Silly girl. Girls who were becoming mothers for the first time were always shy. He gave her the things in his hand and carried her in a princess carry. Pei Qiqi hugged his neck. People will laugh if they see this. No one will laugh. Our Qiqi is going to be a mother soon. It doesn't matter how much I spoil her. He lowered his head and the tip of his nose touched hers. Pei Qiqi bit her lip, then leaned over and bit him. Tang Yu's voice was hoarse. Mrs. Tang, are you trying to stir up a fire? Or are you feeling guilty? Pei Qiqi hugged him tightly. Could she not choose either of them? Because neither of them would have a good ending. She hugged him shamelessly and said softly, "Let's go find Tang Xian, okay?" No. Mr. Tang immediately saw through her thoughts. She whimpered and hugged him. In the distance, Lin Yun and Zhao Yi stood side by side, watching the pair of children being affectionate. Zhao Yi smiled. You can rest assured now. Lin Yun smiled but didn't say anything. Zhao Yi suddenly wrapped his arms around her waist, and in that instant, Lin Yun tensed up. Zhao Yi's voice was soft. Yun, shouldn't you think about our matter? Our matter. Lin Yun's voice was a little low. Zhao Yi only hugged her and smiled bitterly. Yun, don't tell me you want me to be a monk for the rest of my life? They were about the same age. He was almost 50 years old. Other than a few times of foolishness when he was young, he had been chaste ever since he met Lin Yun. Their relationship was like a gentleman's friendship, but did she really think that he didn't have any desire for her? She didn't know that although she was almost 50 years old, she was extremely charming. How could he not be moved by a young woman's charm? Even Lin Yun blushed. She understood what he meant. However, at her age, she still couldn't get over it. If Tang Ziyuan was like that, she could really understand, because ever since Tang Ziyuan had Zhaoku, he couldn't control his lower body at all. Zhao Yi. She looked up and he put his arms around her shoulders. In Yun, I can't hold it in anymore. However, there was no need to rush. It was obvious that Zhao Yi had endured for a long time. Of course, in a place like the Lin family, he did not dare to act rashly. Where was your old bedroom? He asked her in a low voice. Lin Yun's body went limp. After a while, she murmured, Zhao Yi, let's wait a little longer. He couldn't wait a moment longer. In Lin Yun's elegant bedroom, she saw how terrifying a man who had been abstinent for many years could be. She hadn't had sex for many years, and all that came out of her mouth were intoxicating whispers. On the other side, Pei Qiqi hung on Tang Yu's neck and carefully moved closer to his ear. Over there, I think it's Mom and Uncle Zhao. Moreover, it seemed that Uncle Zhao was hugging Tang Yu's mother. How bold. Pei Qiqi thought immorally. How good would it be for old Master Zhao to come out and clean up the family? He couldn't just stare at her and Tang Yu. Chapter 650. Pei Qiqi howled and did not say anything else. He carried her back to the courtyard where he lived and put her on the dressing table with the mirror behind her. Tang Yu held her with one hand and opened the small box with the other. The box was made of wood, and it exuded the fragrance of high-quality wood. Inside, there was a music box made of the same wood. Although the knife work was a little crude, it was still cute, especially since the song inside was to Alice. This time, he had poked the hornet's nest. Pei Chi was a little anxious and reached out for it, but Tang Yu held her back with one hand. He looked at her blushing little face and insisted on listening to the whole song. Well done. Jinrong has put in a lot of effort, he said lightly. Pei Chi bit her little mouth. You said you weren't angry. Tang Yu played with it with one hand, and his eyes were deep. Am I? Pei Chi, when did I say something like that? She glared at him. You're the one who went to see your first love, Mrs. Tang. You have to be conscious of your guilt, Mr. Tang said very generously. Tell me, how are you going to make it up to me? He went around in circles, and all he wanted was compensation. Pei Chi looked at him with watery eyes, and her voice was indescribably delicate. What do you want as compensation? He kissed the corner of her lips. Mrs. Tang, you have to show me your sincerity. With a smack, her little hand touched his handsome face. She was very sincere. Tang Yu stared at her. She was really bold now. There's nothing between me and Jinrong. Unlike someone who still doesn't know what he did with his ex-girlfriend before. The pregnant little mother was fearless. She was pregnant anyway, so he did not dare to do anything to her. Tang Yu pinched her little face. Do you want to settle old scores? No. If you don't mention it, I won't mention it either, she said rather childishly. Then, she hugged his waist and sullenly said like a little lamb, Don't mention it or I'll get angry. Tang Yu didn't know whether to laugh or cry. She was really not afraid of him anymore. I'm still angry. Pei Chi, aren't you going to comfort me? How are we going to coax him? The little person's hand moved downwards. Like this? Her little hands were extremely soft, and she was treating him like that. Tang Yu gasped and lowered his head to look at her. He only felt that his little lovely wife was obedient and obediently pleasing him. For a moment, he was a little reluctant. He took her little hand and wrapped it around his waist. All right, baby. Pei Chi-Chi's face was pressed against his waist. She lifted her head and peeked out. Tang Yu, you really don't want it? He nodded and looked down at her, stroking her long hair gently with his large palm. Hugging him quietly like this was also very beautiful. Tang Yu, you're the best. She hugged him and acted like a spoiled child. She never knew that there was a person who could make her feel so at ease in his arms. He could make her so unguarded and let him dote on her. She thought that she and Jinrong could not be together because Tang Yu would appear. Perhaps everything was already destined. Tang Yu stayed here for 2 days with Pei Chi and Tang Xian before leaving. However, there was someone who left earlier than them. It was his mother and Zhao Yi. He could almost guess what had happened to them. What happened between a man and a woman, and whether it happened or not, could be guessed from their expressions. Chapter 651. Fortunately, Tang Xian still wanted to flatter her, and kept asking if her aunt was sick. It made Lin Yun very uncomfortable. Although Zhao Yi was almost 40 years old, he only had sex once every 20 years, so he could not help but be greedy. That night, he ignored Lin Yun's objections and dragged her away. Grandpa Lin sat at the dining table and looked around, not saying a word. Grandpa Lin sighed in his heart. She had found a companion, and he was the only one left. Fortunately, Tang Xian could still relieve his boredom. If it was not for Tang Yu's insistence to take Tang Xian away, he really hoped that the little girl would stay to accompany his old bones. When Tang Xian left, she went to look for Lin Jinrong. He was sitting in the study, reading a book, a quiet and handsome man. Tang Xian walked over and touched him with her fair little finger. Hey! Lin Jinrong looked up and quietly looked at Tang Xian. Didn't you say you were leaving? Perhaps he was too direct and hurt Tang Xian's little heart. She pouted. The car is at the door. She was here to say goodbye to him. Lin Jinrong replied with an "oh" and looked down at the book in his hand coldly. Tang Exine pursed her lips and said slowly, I saw the present you gave to Chi-Chi. Can you make one for me? Lin Jinrong's fingers that were flipping through the book stopped. His eyes fell on something for a long time before he said, When you get married, I'll give it to you. Get married? She might not be able to wait for it. And he said this to reject her, right? For a 17-year-old girl to have feelings for a boy, this kind of expression was already very clear. But he rejected her. Tang Exine was a little dejected. She replied with an, oh, and slowly walked out. Lin Jinrong stopped her. Wait. Tang Exine suddenly turned around and looked at him with her bright eyes. Lin Jinrong slowly pushed the wheelchair closer and handed over the book in his hand. He said lightly, This is a book that I like recently. It's for you. Just take it as a souvenir. Tang Exine looked at him eagerly and did not say anything for a long time. Lin Jinrong placed the book in his hand into her pure white palm and smiled. Some liking means a lifetime. You're still young, so you don't understand. Tang Exine looked at the book. It was an original book, and it seemed like he had been reading it for quite some time. After a long time, she let out a soft hum and didn't say anything else. He must still like Chi-Chi. Tang Exine sniffed and suddenly felt sorry for Lin Jinrong. She clearly liked Chi-Chi, but she still wanted to see her brother and Chi-Chi together. She wanted to ask more, but Lin Jinrong interrupted her. You don't need to pity me. Tang Exine was stunned. How naive of her. She looked at his face. At this time, he had already regained his calmness. He didn't care about her anymore and pushed the wheelchair back to the original place. The dim light outlined his handsome lines, giving him a kind of melancholic beauty. Tang Exine was a little dazed. She stared at him for a long time before she left. After she left, Lin Jinrong looked up. He looked at the direction of the door for a while, then he smiled and continued to read. Tang Exine got into the car and sat beside Pei Chi-Chi gloomily. She was dejected. Tang Yu turned to look at her and saw the book in her hand. He started the car and asked casually, You want to see Jianrong? Tang Exine looked up and asked, Brother, how did you know? Chapter 652. Tang Exine pursed her lips and her face turned red. Could it be that big brother? Could it be that he had guessed her thoughts? However, as her brother, he still gave her some face and didn't say anything else. Pei Chi-Chi didn't say anything, but it didn't mean that she didn't know. She was a little surprised. Tang Exine and Jinrong? Tang Exine had only seen Jinrong once or twice, and Jinrong was still in a wheelchair. How could she? Moreover, Jinrong was quite cold, and Meng Qingqing had always been good to Tang Exine and always tried to make her happy. However, Tang Exine had always treated Meng Qingqing as her brother, and she didn't see him like this. Pei Chi-Chi pursed her lips and looked at Tang Yu in the rearview mirror. As soon as they returned to the rose garden, Meng Qingqing came over. Tang Exine fell asleep in the car. Tang Yu wanted to carry her out of the car, but Meng Qingqing took the initiative to carry her for him. Tang Yu smiled and didn't stop her. He picked up the book that Tang Exine dropped and put it in Meng Qingqing's arm. This is Tang Exine's. As he said that, he took Chi-Chi's things out of the car and carried them upstairs. They were all gifts from the elders of the Lin family. There were many valuable things for her to play with. Pei Chi-Chi looked at Meng Qingqing's back view, then turned her head and said worriedly, Tang Yu, look at Qingqing. Tang Yu smiled. Don't worry. Qingqing is not a child, and Tang Exine is very young. There's enough time for him to think it through. Pei Chi-Chi said, oh, and didn't say anything else. In the bedroom, Tang Yu put the things away and was about to straighten up when a pair of small hands hugged him from behind. What's wrong, Mrs. Tang? He patted her little hand. I need to pack my things. Although she had only stayed at the Lin mansion for 2 days, a pregnant woman really had a lot of things. Pei Chi-Chi hugged him and pressed her face against his back. She asked softly, You said that Tang Exine has feelings for Jianrong. Is it true? It's just a child's imagination. Tang Yu smiled and pulled her into his arms. His hands and feet bound her, and his gaze was deep. Pei Chi-Chi, are you feeling a little uncomfortable? Do you think that you're... He whispered into her ear. Your first love is going to be snatched away by Tang Xian? Pei Chi was like a little doll in his arms. She pouted and said, I didn't. All right. His voice was hoarse. Then say something nice. He bit her little ear and lectured her naughtily. Pei Chi's little face was completely red. She bit her lip and looked at him pitifully. After a while, she buried her little face in his arms and told him everything. Tang Yu's blood was boiling as he listened. He kissed her and said, All right, go and play. She ran to the door, turned around and stuck her tongue out at him. Tang Yu smiled and continued to tidy up her things, just like an old maid. He valued privacy more. In the past, these things were done by Chi, but since she was pregnant, he had to do it. While he was packing, he couldn't help but smile. Sometimes he would look at what she was doing. In fact, they didn't have to do anything. Just being together was enough. After a while, Pei Chi came to make trouble again. She clung to him from behind and hugged his waist with her little hands. Her voice was also warm. Tang Yu, are you done? He turned his head to look at her and looked a little embarrassed. After a while, he said, Well, Pei Chi, I'm thinking about where to put the things that Jinrong gave you. Pei Chi covered her face and ran away quickly. Chapter 653. The award ceremony in B City was held in a 6-star hotel under the municipal government. It was extremely luxurious and classy. Naturally, the higher-ups would not pay for it. They had no choice but to sponsor it. The Rising Star Award was a very important award. At least the winners had a certain level of credibility in the industry. Of course, Pei Chi's credibility was more reflected in her being Tang Yu's wife and the wife of the CEO of Shengyuan Group. At the dinner party, all the important figures in politics and business were present. Of course, Tang Yu would be there too. When she heard that he was going to give an award to a beautiful businesswoman tonight, Pei Chi argued with him at home for a while. At 4 in the afternoon, the styling studio came over to style her. Naturally, Tang Yu would not let her wear a gown that had been worn by others. He ordered a haute couture gown. The top was embroidered with smoke-colored gauze, and the bottom was a cake-cut denim skirt. It was simple and lively. Most importantly, it was comfortable. As for the shoes, she chose a pair of medium heels. Fortunately, her legs were long and slender, so it was not bad. The stylist tied her hair up high. Her face was covered with a layer of honey powder, and her lips were the color of jelly. She looked unbelievably young. She did not look like a mother at all, but a little girl. After changing, Tang Yu came over and looked at her deeply. Then, he leaned over and kissed her. His voice was a little hoarse. Very beautiful. Mr. Tang has good taste. She praised him. Tang Yu raised his eyebrows. Are you talking about choosing the person or the dress? Pei Chi hugged his arm. Both. He chuckled and reached out to pinch her little nose. You little shameless girl. They took the same car there, but when they arrived at the party, they sat separately. Tang Yu was the senior host. He was in the middle of the first row, so his status was naturally high. As for Pei Chi, the small pay group, she was in the 18th row. Pei Chi and Tang Yu were about 10 rows apart. When Tang Yu saw the seats, he frowned and wanted to ask someone to arrange a seat for her. However, Pei Chi refused. She felt that it wasn't good to be treated like that. Only then did Tang Yu give up. After he sat down, Shen Zhongshan happened to be next to him. He nodded slightly. Uncle Shen. Shen Zhongshan smiled. Didn't Tang Yu come with Boss Pei? Where is little Boss Pei? Tang Yu turned his head and looked in Pei Chi's direction. Then he smiled and said, Behind us. Shen Zhongshan also looked over and sat down with them. I heard that when you guys walked the red carpet just now, it shocked the media. This was the first time Tang Yu and his wife were together after their marriage, so all the media wanted to get first-hand news. Tang Yu and Pei Chi were also very cooperative and killed a lot of film. Hearing Shen Zhongshan's words, Tang Yu smiled faintly. Uncle Shen must be joking. Chi is a good seedling. It's a pity that she's at home, Shen Zhongshan suddenly said. Tang Yu was stunned, but it only lasted for a moment before he returned to normal. It depends on Chi-Chi. He didn't really want his wife to be a strong woman. However, if Chi-Chi liked to work, he wouldn't object. Of course, he would protect his woman. Shin Zhongshan didn't say anything else. The host just happened to be on stage. She was very young and beautiful. She was also quite experienced and very popular. The awards were presented one after another. When Tang Yu presented the award to the young beauty, the beauty asked for a hug. Chapter 654. The beauty was a little uncomfortable. The MC was good at reading people's expressions. He sneered inside. Was this woman crazy? Didn't she know that Tang Yu loved his wife as much as his own life? How could he ask for a hug in front of another man's wife? His IQ was obviously not online. How did he manage to grow his business? However, the MC was still smiling. Mr. Tang is a bit henpecked. At this time, most men would deny it and say that they were respecting their wives. But Tang Yu didn't. He looked at Pei Chi-Chi and smiled. Then he said with some distress, "Mrs. Tang is a little hard to please." That was a lot of information. The MC's mouth twitched. Then he signaled for the lights to shine on Pei Chi-Chi. He coughed and said, "Mrs. Tang, do you allow Mr. Tang to hug someone out of courtesy?" He was deliberately making things difficult for her. He wanted to see Pei Chi-Chi's ability to react on the spot. Moreover, this was a live broadcast. Pei Chi-Chi took the microphone and tilted her head. "Tang Yu, what should I say?" Her voice was a little soft, and there was no sense of distance at all. Moreover, when she talked to Tang Yu, she fully displayed the obedience of a little wife. Tang Yu was henpecked. So, there was basically no trace of it. Tang Yu looked at her from the stage and smiled. "Chi-Chi, you can say whatever you want." "Oh." Pei Chi-Chi replied softly. "Of course I don't want it to be." She was showing off their affection. Actually, she didn't want to embarrass the MC, but it was obvious that he wanted to embarrass her. Moreover, a young woman wanted to hug a man of her age in front of his wife. Pei Chi-Chi wasn't stupid. She knew that it could be interpreted as a provocation, and she had always hated provocations. Tang Yu expressed his appreciation for her answer. The MC looked a little uncomfortable. He had wanted to liven things up, but he didn't expect that neither Tang Yu nor Pei Chi-Chi would cooperate. Finally, it was Pei Chi-Chi's turn to receive the award. Unfortunately, it was Shen Zhongshan who was going to present the award to her. When Shen Zhongshan mentioned her name, Pei Chi-Chi stood up and was about to walk onto the stage. Tang Yu suddenly walked over and held her arm. He smiled at her and said, "Let me help you up." Pei Chi-Chi glanced at him and didn't say anything in the end. She followed him up the stage. Tang Yu walked to the side once he reached the stage. Shin Zhongshan handed the crystal trophy to Pei Chi-Chi and said in a slightly hoarse voice, "Congratulations, Boss Pei." He looked at her smiling face, which was as lively as an expensive oil painting, and felt a little dazed for a moment. This was his daughter, but he could only call her Boss Pei. Even if he called her Chi-Chi, it still seemed a little abrupt. After Shen Zhongshan gave out the award, he felt a sense of loss in his heart. For a moment, he sighed and hugged Pei Chi-Chi. The crowd was in an uproar. Boss Pei had double standards. However, no one dared to say anything. They didn't even dare to look at Mr. Tang's black face. Pei Chi-Chi pursed her lips and was a little surprised. However, he was still an elder. Although it was a little stiff, she still didn't push Shin Zhongshan away. It was really fucking doggy. Shin Zhongshan was Shun Lian's father. Hugging her, Pei Chi-Chi, was as unbelievable as the moon hitting the earth. Shin Zhongshan only hugged her lightly and then let go. After that, he stood side by side with Pei Chi-Chi and accepted the media's photos. At that moment, he was more or less proud in his heart. This was Shun Zhongshan's daughter. Any father would like his daughter who was capable and beautiful. Chapter 655. Shin Zhongshan felt a little emotional. He patted Pei Chi-Chi and said, "Congratulations, Chi." There was a touch of tenderness and love in his eyes. It almost flashed to Pei Chi-Chi. Before she could think about it, she was asked to leave the stage. Tang Yu supported her. He did not send her back to where she came from. Instead, he arranged for her to sit next to him. So, Pei Qi and Shun Zhongshan sat together again. Pei Qi and Tang Yu talked in low voices. Shun Zhongshan would occasionally look at her. He had never had such a chance to sit so close to her. Maybe this was the only chance. However, the more loving his eyes were, the angrier Shun Lian was in front of the TV. He still had Pei Qi in his heart. Many years ago, he betrayed her mother and was with Zhao Ke. Many years later, he betrayed her and cared about Pei Qi. Was he going to hand over the company to Pei Qi and save Tang Xian after that? No, she would never let him do that. With her, there would be no Pei Qi. The Shin family only had one daughter, Shun Lian. Shin Lian looked up, and there was a touch of coldness in her eyes. When Shin Zhongshan came back, it was already late at night. He closed the door and heard a cold voice coming from the sofa. "Dad, did you have a good time tonight?" Shin Zhongshan walked over slowly and looked at Shun Lian, who was sitting on the sofa. He frowned. "Shun Lian, why are you wearing so little?" Shun Lian chuckled softly. "It was a little strange. You still care about me?" Shin Zhongshan frowned. He sat down and faced Shin Lian. "What's wrong? Who made you angry this time?" Because of Tang Yu's marriage, especially Pei Qi's pregnancy, Shun Lian had suffered a huge blow. During this period of time, she had been acting weird. Shin Zhongshan and Mrs. Shun were used to it, so they gave in to her. Shin Lian pursed her lips and looked up. Her long curly hair covered half of her face as she stared at Shin Zhongshan. "Dad, when are you going to bring Pei Qi back to acknowledge her ancestors?" The muscles on Shin Zhongshan's face kept twitching and finally became stiff. "What are you talking about? Isn't it?" Shun Lian's tone was full of sarcasm. "You were such a loving father at the awards ceremony today. Dad, now that Pei Qi is married to Tang Yu, won't you fulfill your ambition if you acknowledge her?" Shun Zhongshan's voice was restrained as he stared at Shun Lian. "Be careful, your mother is still at home." Shun Lian suddenly threw a table on the coffee table at the opposite wall. With a bang, it broke into pieces. "Are you still worried about her? If you were worried about her, you wouldn't have slept with other women, and you wouldn't have gotten pregnant with a bastard. Now, you're fighting with me for the Shin family's assets." Shun Lian stood up in anger. No one had ever dared to speak to Shin Zhongshan like this. Moreover, it was his daughter who he regarded as the apple of his eye. Chapter 656. Shin Lian turned around and looked at Shun Zhongshan in disbelief. There was still anger on her face. It stung. That slap felt as if Pei Qi had personally slapped her face. She had never been humiliated like this before. Shin Zhongshan's sharp eyes looked old. His lips moved as if he wanted to say something, but he swallowed it back. "Dad, you hit me." Shin Lian covered her face and said softly, "I want to tell Mom what you have done all these years. Tell Mom that you have given Zhaoku 2 children." In her eyes, there was a determination to fight to the death. Shin Zhongshan had never thought that he would raise such a reckless daughter. She kept saying that it was for her mother, but he knew that it was for himself. For the Shin family's company, and for Tang Yu. Shin Zhongshan was about to lose his temper, but his face suddenly turned purple and then pale. He wanted to say something, but his heart was in pain, and he could not say anything. He took out a bottle of quick heart pills from his pocket with trembling hands, but he could not open it for a long time. His body tilted and slowly slid down, and the medicine rolled on the side. Shin Zhongshan had a myocardial infarction. If he did not take the medicine, he might die. Shun Lian knew that her whole body was trembling as she stood there, but she did not move. She just watched her father crawling on the ground, desperately trying to reach the bottle of medicine. Would he die if he did not take the medicine? Then, no one would stop her, and she would be the only heir of the Shin family. Mom would not blame her, because Shin Zhongshan had betrayed her. Shun Lian smiled, with tears in her eyes. Yes, she was not wrong. She did not want to kill him, she just did not give him the medicine. Shin Zhongshan crawled on the ground, desperately trying to reach the bottle, but he could not reach it. He lay on the ground, panting, and his voice was getting weaker and weaker. Mrs. Shun stood at the top of the stairs, screamed, and rushed over. She squatted down and held Shin Zhongshan with one hand. She opened the bottle with the other hand and fed him a pill. After a while, the medicine took effect, and Shin Zhongshan slowly recovered. Chongshan, how are you? Mrs. Shin patted his face and felt relieved. Shin Chongshan opened his eyes and met Shan Lian's gaze. Shin Lian felt guilty. She shivered and pursed her beautiful lips tightly. After a long time, Shin Zhongshan slowly said, "I'm fine." Mrs. Shan helped him to sit on the sofa. Then she frowned and looked at Shin Lian, who was still standing opposite her. "What's wrong with you? Your father couldn't get the medicine. Why didn't you get it for him? This illness can kill him." Shin Lian's face was extremely pale, and so were her lips. They were almost the same color as her face. For a long time, she could not say a word. Shin Zhongshan waved his hand and said in a hoarse voice, "Don't blame the child. She was scared." Mrs. Shun was still a little dissatisfied and scolded Shin Lian a few more times. Shin Zhongshan signaled her to stop talking. Shin Lian apologized and said that she was scared. When she left, Shin Zhongshan looked at her back with an unfathomable look. This child, just now, was prepared to watch him die. Should he make other plans? Shin Zhongshan didn't listen to Mrs. Shun and went to rest. Instead, he went to the study. Chapter 657. Shin Lian went out after Shin Zhongshan, and Mrs. Shun went upstairs. Late at night, she sat alone in the car and leaned against the steering wheel for a long time. Her body was trembling. Tonight, she had almost watched her father die, but she was also disappointed in him. He had disappointed her again and again. Shin Lian raised her head and flipped her hair. She picked up the phone and dialed Qin Anlin's number. "Anlin, you say bar. If you don't show up, I'll sleep with the first man who buys me a drink." Her voice was flat, as if she was talking about something that had nothing to do with her. Qin Anlin cursed under his breath, while Shan Lian laughed. An hour later, Yisei Bar. Qin Anlin found Shan Lian in the middle of a group of men. She was lying there, slightly drunk. Her long curly hair was scattered over her shoulders, blocking a trace of spring on her shoulders. He only needed to stand there and have a strong aura, and those men who wanted to take advantage of him would automatically make way for him. Qin Anlin walked over and pulled Shan Lian's slender arm. He gritted his teeth and asked, "What's wrong with you now?" Shin Lian lost her balance and fell into his arms. She did not move for a long time and just lay in his arms obediently. After a long time, she called out seductively like a kitten, "Qin Anlin, you won't leave me alone, will you?" Qin Anlin's face was slightly raised, and there was a suppressed expression on his face. "I just don't want to see you in the headlines tomorrow." She already had things that others could not imagine. So many things. Was Tang Yu really that important? Shan Lian leaned on his shoulder, and her little finger gently stroked the back of his shirt. "Qin Anlin, we are the same now. We can't get what we want, and we are equally pitiful." She smiled charmingly. "Anlin, Pei Chi is pregnant with Tang Yu's child." She moved her lips to his ear and whispered, "Think about it. What position did they use to make love in order to have this child? Do you think Tang Yu is at the top or the back?" Qin Anlin's body was a little tense, so was his face. Shin Lian's fingers moved down boldly and touched something solid. "Did you wake up here because of me, or because you thought of Pei Chi?" She bit his earlobe. "Anlin, I didn't expect you to be so innocent." As soon as she finished speaking, her body was held in place by Qin Anlin. His arm was like an iron clamp around her waist, not giving her a chance to struggle. Under the dim light, his eyes were faintly burning, and his voice was unbelievably hoarse. "Shin Lian, what do you want?" She was a little hurt by him, but she still giggled and leaned on his shoulder. "Anlin, do you dare to want me? I don't believe you. You're attracted to Pei Chi, that little holy maiden. Do you think you can be more stubborn when it comes to other women?" Qin Anlin's eyes blazed like flames, filled with anger. His arm tightened, and he dragged the person in his arms to a darker corner. With a spin, Shunlian's body hit the wall behind her. It hurt. Then, her arms were raised high, and her body was pressed against him forcefully. It was clearly painful, but Shunlian was very excited. She raised her little face, showing off her beautiful neck and sexy collarbone. She looked at him. "Do you dare to want me here?" Qin Anlin moved closer. "You're playing with fire." He leaned forward. "Shunlian, this is not a game you can play." Chapter 658. Qin Anlin looked at her for a long time. He gave her time to regret, to resist, to struggle, and to leave. However, Shunlian seemed particularly manic. She was twisting her body, inviting him to do it. Half of it was anger, and the other half was desire. Qin Anlin was in the bar, in a dark corner, deeply, deeply. The humidity in the air seemed to have reached saturation, and there was the smell of sweat everywhere. There was also an indescribable aura. Qin Anlin leaned against the side of her neck, and his voice was bewildered. "Do you think I don't dare to?" Shunlian was so excited that she kept gasping. They had only done it once, and this was the second time. She bit his shoulder with all her might to stop herself from making strange sounds. After a while, she probably couldn't take it anymore. She looked up and said in a muffled voice, "Anlin, Anlin." Qin Anlin's dark eyes looked at her intoxicated expression. His eyes were clear, and there was even a hint of coldness in the corner of his mouth. She did not call him by the wrong name when they made love. It was a pure venting, and it was their first time. It didn't take long, about 10 minutes in total. However, due to the stimulation of the environment, Shunlian still trembled uncontrollably. She hugged him, sobbed, and called him Tangyu. She moaned softly again and again, sounding like an obedient kitten. Qin Anlin calmed down for 10 seconds and suddenly pushed her away. Shunlian was flustered, and her body slid down. Qin Anlin stood in front of her. His face was cold, and there was no trace of laziness after lust. He slowly cleaned himself with a tissue, threw it on the floor, and zipped it up. Shunlian was sweating all over, and she sat on the floor, looking at him. Her eyes were still filled with shock. "I'm not a substitute. And Shunlian, if you want a man, I can satisfy you, but it depends on my mood." Qin Anlin looked around. "If you don't want to be eaten alive by the men here, leave as soon as possible." As he spoke, he turned around and left without any reluctance. Shunlian was still sitting, her whole body cold. From this moment on, she really felt that Qin Anlin really didn't want her. In the past, she had always thought that he was only angry at her, and that his interest in Pei Chi was only temporary. Now, he wanted her, but she was the same as the small models and celebrities in his company. On this day, Shunlian finally realized that the reason he didn't want her before wasn't because of love or pride, but because he really didn't love her anymore. She sat there in tears, and he did not look back. She called out hoarsely behind him, "Qin Anlin." He paused and looked back. Shunlian sat there and cried. She said to him heartbreakingly, "Let's be together, Qin Anlin, okay?" He stood in a place where there was some light, and he slowly took out a cigarette and smoked it. Chapter 659. It was already late at night. Even though it was June, there was still a hint of moist coolness at night. Qin Anlin parked the car on the road about 100 meters away from the rose garden. He opened the car door and got out. He took a pack of cigarettes and leaned against the car door. He didn't know why he came here. Maybe it was because of what Shunlian said. He lit a cigarette quietly and thought of Pei Chi-Chi's pregnancy. What did pregnancy have to do with posture? His gaze was a little distant. If he still had some feelings for Shunlian before, then from today onwards, there was nothing left. He didn't feel anything, from his heart to his body. When he did it with her, it was really no different from those small celebrities. It was probably because Shunlian had been with many men. He could still remember the first time he and Shunlian had met, how shyly she opened her mouth and pressed her hot lips on his, He would never forget it for the rest of his life. However, she was no longer the Shunlian of the past. As early as the second day when she told him that he was just a tool for her to test Tangyu, he knew that he and Shenlian would never be able to be together. Qin Anlin slowly smoked his cigarette. He stood alone in the darkness. It seemed like many years ago that he was sad because of a girl. It was very distant and a little ridiculous. However, he still did it. It wasn't that he couldn't control it, but he didn't want to control it. She was already married, but how could she still touch his heart? Moreover, how could she make him willingly, without any struggle, make her happy? This didn't seem like something that Qin Anlin would do. A ray of light slid across the sky. It was a meteor. Then, another ray of light, followed by another. The night was savagely cut open. The calm was destroyed. The sky was filled with dazzling light. Only then did Qin Anlin remember that there seemed to be a meteor shower tonight. He didn't have any intention of making a wish, because that was something that only a little girl would believe. He looked up and saw a pair of figures appearing on the second floor of the building. At that moment, Qin Anlin's body stiffened. Tang Yu and Pei Chi-Chi, all in white, standing on the balcony. He saw Pei Chi-Chi lying on the balcony with Tang Yu hugging her from behind. Although they were quite a distance apart, the scene was beautiful. Qin Anlin felt like he was torturing himself. He just watched as Tang Yu turned her body around. Watching them kiss, the corner of his mouth twitched slightly, and he didn't know how to coordinate his facial muscles. He took a long drag on his cigarette, opened the car door, and exhaled deeply. He must have gone mad. The high-performance sports car sped away. In the distance, the meteor shower continued to streak past. However, Qin Anlin's heart was a sea of darkness. In the distance, Tang Yu kissed Pei Chi-Chi and slowly let go of her. His voice was a little hoarse. Chi-Chi, it's cold outside. Go back to the bedroom. Be good. She curled up in his arms and was unusually disobedient. I want to watch a little longer. He looked at her disapprovingly, then carried her and walked towards the bedroom. Tang Yu, I want to watch a little longer, the little mother pleaded softly. She hugged his black head and clung to him like a little kitten. Tang Yu placed her on the edge of the bed and squatted down to look her in the eye. Chapter 660. The moment he mentioned the child, Pei Chi-Chi became obedient. She hugged his shoulders and said coquettishly, I made a wish just now, Tang Yu. He still maintained this posture, looking up at her and patting her little hand gently. What did our Chi-Chi wish for? She pouted and hugged his neck. I can't say it. It won't come true if I say it. Her expression was indescribably cheeky and happy. It was something he had seen often recently. Chi-Chi was really different from how she used to be. In the past, she was actually a little cold and didn't like to talk much. Now, she was a clingy person. But when she liked someone, no matter what she became, she would still like that person. Tang Yu smiled and reached out to rub her little head. Then pretend well. Tell Mr. Tang when it comes true. She said sweetly, okay. Tang Yu looked at her and suddenly asked her meaningfully, Chi-Chi, you said earlier that you still want to see the meteor shower, right? You really want me to see it? She hugged him. The weather forecast said that the meteor shower would last the entire night. Tang Yu's gaze was deep. He carried her horizontally and walked out of the bedroom. Going up a staircase to the rooftop, he reached out and pressed a button. A glass room of about 20 square meters magically appeared on the rooftop. There was a king-sized bed in it. There were black roses scattered on the bed and on the floor. It was a visual impact. Coupled with the meteor shower in the sky, everything was extremely beautiful. Pei Chi-Chi was stunned. She bit her lips and after a long time, she turned her head and looked at him. Tang Yu, when did you prepare this? He smiled and carried her in. He placed her on the king-sized bed and hovered above her. One arm supported him, and the other hand touched her lips. I prepared it when I knew there would be a meteor shower. Pei Chi-Chi hugged his arm and took the roses beside her. She looked up at the starry sky. Those meteors were falling in whole pieces. It was so beautiful that it seemed unreal. Her long hair was spread on the pillow, and her bathrobe had already come loose. Chi-Chi. His voice was a little hoarse as he kissed her lips. I want you to be happy. Chi-Chi, my wish is for you to be happy. Tang Yu lay down and pulled her little body into his arms. The two of them snuggled up together and watched the meteors streak across the sky. Just watching like this would make one believe that there was eternity in this world. It was late at night, and the glass house was warm. Pei Chi-Chi was lying on the bed. The surrounding white and black formed a strong contrast. Her little face was slightly raised. She felt the rose in Tang Yu's hand slowly moving down her neck. It was ice cold. She grabbed his arm with her small hand and said in a weak voice, "Tang Yu." Her eyes were blindfolded, so she could not see and felt uneasy. "Be good and feel it." Tang Yu kissed her ear to comfort her and continued. Ever since she was pregnant, he had never wanted her. Tonight, he wanted her. The pure starry sky and the transparent glass house made her feel like she was in nature. She felt a little curious and shy. She slowly opened herself up. In the end, Pei Chi-Chi cried out because she was afraid. Her long eyelashes were trembling, and there were 2 drops of tears on them. It was very lovable. Tang Yu leaned over and kissed her, but she cried even harder. She hugged him with her little hands and refused to let him continue. You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.